Dr. Bridget Shield. She is a professor in acoustics at South Bank University in London, and she is going to speak on the same topic, the same theme we have this morning.
Thank you very much. Just before I start on my prepared talk, I just want to sort of hot off the press tell you something that happened yesterday, which I know will be of Valdis will be pleased to hear. I know one of Valdis's concerns is the problems of activity noise, and as we've heard yesterday and this morning, and the impact of that on children and children's hearing and so on. And a few years ago, I was on a committee set up by our Department of Health, and the purpose of the committee was to do a report on the health impacts of environmental noise, and the purpose of that was really to advise our Department of Health as to whether they should have a sort of a permanent body looking at noise in the same way as they have one looking at air quality and so on, which they didn't have. So anyway, we did a report and we recommended that they should have this committee. And yesterday, when I went back to my hotel yesterday evening, I checked my email, and there was an email from the Health Protection Agency, which is the body of the Department of Health that sort of looks after these things. And it was a report for comment. They've taken on board that they should have a noise committee, and there was a sort of 20-page report, draft report, on how this committee is going to function and the sorts of things they should look at. And when we did our original report, which was published in 2010, it looked at, as far as children were concerned, it looked at the sorts of things I was talking about yesterday, the impact of noise on children's performance, which myself and many other people have looked at. But what it said yesterday, it talked about that, and then it said new topics to be considered, such as, this is what the committee is going to consider, new topics to be considered, such as how to reduce children's exposure to noise, including at childcare centres, kindergartens, schools and public recreational settings. So isn't that amazing that, that arrived yesterday afternoon? Whether it will, how it will be implemented, I don't know, but I just thought that was such a coincidence, so I had to tell you that. Okay, I'll now go on to my proper talk. And at the end of the talk, it's going to be presented by myself and by Nick Durrup, who is a PhD student who's just started working on Teacher's Voice. So at the end of the talk, Nick will just stand up and talk a bit about his project and where that's going. Unfortunately, I haven't got an awful lot to say about research into voice that's going on in the UK, because there's virtually nothing apart from just sort of little snippets that we've done as part of our research. Again, the sorts of things I showed you yesterday. So what I'll do is I'll just talk briefly about, as the other speakers have done, sort of various reports and things that have been published in the last 10 or 12 years in the UK, and sort of how aware we are, which is not very aware, of voice problems among teachers, and our current legislation on school acoustics, which again I mentioned yesterday. We have got a very active organisation called the Voice Care Network, which some of you might know. It was set up by Ros Commins, who's a good friend of Valdis's. And the purpose of this organisation is to help people keep their voices healthy and to communicate effectively. And the Voice Care Network is very active in sort of organising meetings. It does a lot of work with mainly teachers and call centre workers, people who have problems with their voice, and it organises training, seminars. It publishes booklets and things on practical advice on how to look after your voice in environments such as teaching or call centres and so on. They do some work in universities, teacher training courses. Ros does some training, but again, it is minimal. I'll come back to that a bit later on. There's very little training done of teachers in how to use their voice. An early report on the sort of incidence of teachers' voice problems in the UK was actually done by the Voice Care Network, and David Commins did a survey of voice clinics around the UK and came up with the conclusion that 12% of voice clinic patients were teachers, whereas they represent 1.5% of the workforce. And similar figures have been published in, Scandinavia, in in Canada, there was a similar survey, and they all come up with much the same figures. In one of our early studies, we asked, when we did our original questionnaire survey of primary school teachers, we asked, again, fairly basic questions, but we asked about voice symptoms. And the figures are there. 89% of the respondents said that they had painful throat. 77% of them said they also had hoarseness, voice loss, and throat infections. What we didn't ask was the frequency of these problems, but it was sort of within the previous few years. Only 4% of the teachers out of the 51 said that they had had no health problems, no problems with their voice. And when we looked at those particular teachers, they were the ones who tended to report that their schools were quiet, that they'd only taught for a few years, and also they said they didn't raise their voice as a means of sort of controlling the class. Because another question we asked was, how do you cope with noise in the classroom? And you can see here that the majority, 34% or so, said they raised their voice. That was the most common way of coping with noise in the classroom. So it's not surprising that that led to lots of voice problems. We also, in a second project, measured the voice level of primary school teachers. And this is measurements of 36 teachers. The blue ones are females and the red ones are males. And what's interesting is that you'll see the males, you know, it's the female teachers that have the higher voice levels on the whole when you look at that pattern. That was the voice level measured 1 metre from the teacher's mouth. And just to compare that with what is the sort of standard level that was quoted yesterday, that's in various standards, average level for males is 65 decibels, and the average level for females is 60 decibels. So again, if you compare that, that was normal speaking voice, 65 for males, 60 for females. So again, it's no surprise that teachers experience voice problems. Another survey was carried out by one of our teaching unions, the Association of Teachers and Lecturers, in 2008. And this surveyed nearly 500 teachers around the United Kingdom. And you can see that 60% overall said they had voice problems. Interestingly, the figure was higher in the local authority schools, 68%, rather than independent private schools, which have more money and are likely to have better acoustics, although there's no acoustic, likely to have smaller class sizes as well. You know, lots of reasons why the teachers might not need to raise their voices so much in the independent sector. And then they also asked the teachers how often they raise their voice, and that data is there as well. 40% said they got little or no support from the school. And you can see nearly 90% said that voice care should be compulsory in teacher training. The interesting thing about that survey is that it got a lot of publicity. It was reported quite widely in the press, both in the educational press and in the national press. Now again, in the recent project that we've just finished in secondary schools, I think I showed this slide yesterday, asking teachers if they experience voice problems. We then looked in more detail at how much time they took off and whether they'd been referred to a voice clinic and so on, but I haven't actually got that data here. As I think I said yesterday, we're still in the process of analysing all the data from that project. But on average, over all the schools, 52% reported voice problems. And you can see it's round about sort of 50% across the 7 schools. And I also pointed out yesterday the high incidence of hearing problems in the open plan school. If we have a look at the economic consequences of teachers' voice problems, again, this was reported quite widely in the press about a year, 18 months ago. I think the teacher's absence also came out of the ATL study that I showed you just now. 73,000 teaching days are lost in British primary schools due to teachers' voice strain, and they estimate that's a cost of £15 million. Then as far as compensation is concerned, I say, and I only found the 2006 one when I was sort of doing a search when I was preparing this talk last week, but £8,000 was awarded to a Scottish teacher who lost the voice due to environmental and acoustic conditions. But 2 years ago, in November 2010, a London teacher was awarded £150,000 for voice damage, and that it was claimed that it was due to noise. I think the school was next to a building site, and there was a lot of construction work, and there wasn't sufficiently good sound insulation, so she was affected by this noise when she was teaching in the classroom. That got an awful lot of publicity. It was reported very widely it was on the front page of the London Evening Standard, which is the main evening newspaper in London, and in the national press as well. So it was quite interesting to see how much publicity was given to that case. It doesn't seem to have changed anything as regards sort of general training or publicity about voice problems. Then various reports which have highlighted problems to the voice. The National Union of Teachers published it was a sort of A4 fly sheet in 2004 called Workhorse, and that was to raise among teachers and among the general public the problems of dangers to the voice. Again, that got quite a lot of publicity. There were sort of reports on the radio and things, and reports in the press. I've mentioned already the Association of Teachers and Lecturers survey. And then voice training in teacher training courses, I suspect that is actually on the decrease. Again, in one of our surveys, we surveyed a lot of trainee teachers, and they said they hadn't had any voice training at all. As I said, Ros Commons does some work going into universities, but I think, that she's just not allowed to have sufficient time to do the training, maybe 1 hour or something. It's certainly not a regular thing throughout the teacher training courses. I also found a report which I was unaware of until last week, which was published by the General Teaching Council of Scotland, which surveyed all the teacher training institutes in Scotland to find out how much voice training they provided. And again, it was very little. The most they found was one session at the beginning of the course, and then maybe, if people were having problems, they were allowed to have some follow-up sessions. But it certainly wasn't a regular thing throughout the course. So they recommended that teacher training courses should introduce greater awareness, and they should have more lectures, workshops and so on throughout the teacher training course. That teachers in schools should be provided with information on voice care and training, and that speech and language therapists should press for a national policy on voice care and the extent of teachers' voice problems. Now, I don't know whether that has led to any further action in Scotland. I suspect probably not, but I don't have any evidence for that. Sorry, I missed that last slide. I was reading it from here. There is a scheme at the moment. We've moved or are introducing more schemes of teacher training where the students don't go to university, but they actually train in schools. And there's a consortium of schools, of about 50 schools in Essex, that are doing what they call the school-centred teacher training programme. And this does provide voice training for the teachers. And it's been praised. There was you see the Ofsted report that's reported there, an excellent voice development programme for trainees, which has reduced their absence, escalated their progress, and supported their behaviour management and so on. So that's good news, and that's a recent innovation. So that, again, has had quite a lot of publicity, and I've just put this up. I thought that was rather a nice cartoon that was used to illustrate the report on that. So as an alternative to controlling your class with a shield and a sword, you could try voice classes. Now, we've already talked a lot about the acoustic conditions that are necessary for low background noise, low reverberation, and good sound insulation. And I now want to talk about our current regulations, which are currently being revised, and again, they've been mentioned. We've got two sets of regulations which govern the acoustic design of schools. We've got schools premises regulations, which cover all sorts of things, sort of water, sanitation, lighting, and so on, and acoustics. And they apply to school buildings sort of in operation. And then we've also got the building regulations, which apply to the design of new buildings. And schools were brought into the building regulations in 2003. This is the document that was published in 2003, which I was one of the editors of, and it contains specifications for school buildings, and then also, which is just the first section, so to meet the building regulations, schools have to comply with the specifications that are in the first section of this document in there, and we'll have a look at a few of those in a moment. And the rest of this is sort of guidance on how you might achieve that, so sort of guidance for architects and planners and acoustic consultants on how the regulations might be met. So that is a legal requirement, but just for new school buildings. So it's just applied to new buildings since 2003. And the sorts of things, and again we've seen some of these already. So I think I've missed. The things it specifies are background noise levels, reverberation times, which we've talked a lot about, sound insulation, and again that's both sound insulation of the building facade and internal sound insulation, the amount of sound absorption that's required in corridors and circulation areas, and then also speech intelligibility in open plan classrooms. So the sorts of things we've got, that's just the noise levels and the reverberation times there, which we've seen. But it covers a whole range of different types of spaces in schools. But one of the problems with it, that there's a clause in it that the Department for Education insisted on, saying you must allow alternative performance standards. So if somebody can come up with good educational or environmental or energy, whatever reasons, for not meeting these criteria, then they can apply relax these criteria and have sort of higher noise levels and things. And of course they have been very widely used because the architects decide they can't meet the criteria, they want higher noise levels or whatever, and it's not difficult to justify them. But the building regulations is currently under revision, and the revised ones are imminent. And what's happened, I'll just sort of skip through the history because it's quite interesting, that our previous government, the Labour government, agreed we could have a revision, and the minister in October 2009, the schools minister, stood up in the House of Commons and said, yes, we need good acoustics in schools. But then we had a general election, and our coalition government was elected. The first thing they did, they scrapped our building programme for new schools, building schools for the future. They got rid of all the building bulletins that I'd mentioned, including this one, all the guidance on school design. They commissioned 2 reports to look at the costs of school buildings, and both reports concluded that it was a burden, that the cost of meeting all these regulations was a burden, and so the government decided they should all be abolished. And they also, it was interesting, Maria's talking about Swedish free schools, because the other thing the government has done is introduce the concept of free schools, so now they're putting schools in old warehouses and old churches and things that are totally unsuitable. We then, the Institute of Acoustics, which is our UK body, which I'm currently president of at the moment, it's the sort of UK body for anybody working in acoustics, we sort of became political for the first time and lobbied the government and said, basically, you can't do this. You've got to keep the regulations. It's very important. And we produced a briefing note. Again, the Department of Education said, if you want to convince government ministers, you've got to talk about the costs. That's the only thing they'll listen to. So we produced a briefing note, and I've got some copies of it here if anybody's interested, which covered the costs of poor acoustics in schools, the effects of noise and poor acoustics on pupils' attainments, the effects of noise and poor acoustics on teachers, and then they also said the other thing you must cover is how the UK leads the world. So there's a section here, so apologies to the rest of you, the section that says how the UK leads the world. But anyway, it worked. It worked. The school premises regulations which I think had 24 regulations covering, as I say, acoustics, lighting, toilets, everything. And they've got rid of 16 of them, 16 or 17 of them. I think they've kept 7, but acoustics is one of the ones they've kept. So we're really, really pleased about that. And they've kept the building regulations. They've kept the regulation on acoustics. And the revised regulations that are sort of going through at the moment are slightly more stringent. For a long time, there was a concern that, OK, we could keep them, but they would be very much relaxed. The noise levels would go up from 35 dB in the classroom to 40, and reverberation times would be longer and so on, because it would be cheaper to build to the more relaxed standards. But, in fact, they've sort of been extended, so they're now they're not going to apply just to new school buildings, they're going to include refurbished buildings as well, so that's good news. There's also going to be a maximum limit on these alternative performance standards, so that's good news. The guidance bit of this document is being revised as well. It's going to appear not as one book, but the regulation and the sort of specifications that have to be met are going to be one thing, and then we're going to publish a separate book on guidance on how to meet that. So that's really good news, so we're really, really pleased about that. And the other thing the Department for Education wanted to know was, have the regulations been effective? And looking at the data from the study that we've just completed, the secondary school study, we've got, this is just a few of the rooms that we've measured, but if you just compare the pre and post figures for noise levels, reverberation time, and STI, which has been mentioned a few times today, the speech transmission index, you can see that both for cellular classrooms, enclosed classrooms and open plan rooms, the INAL is this background noise level of, we're supposed to meet 35 dB for classrooms. And so you can see that that has gone down. The reverberation time on average has gone down, and the speech transmission index has gone up. And also, that if you look at the standard deviations of all the parameters, those have decreased, which implies that there's a much more consistency about building now. So we concluded that, yes, the regulations have been effective. And I'm now going to hand over to Nick, who's going to talk to you about the new research project that we're doing, looking in particular at vocal strain of teachers.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, my name's Nick Durrop. I'm a part-time PhD student at London South Bank, and my profession when I'm not doing that is I'm an acoustic consultant. As part of my work, I also design schools, so I have an interest in both the academic and the professional side. I'm involved in a research project under Bridget, which is looking at the effects of classroom acoustics in terms of the physical acoustics of the classroom, and in terms of the impact on vocal strain in teachers. There's two strands to the project I'm involved in. The first is to carry out a large-scale questionnaire of teachers to gain more information about the prevalence of strain, detailed information on that, and also on the perception of acoustics in classrooms in general. And in order to do that and to reach the maximum number of teachers, we're actually doing a web-based questionnaire which will be promoted and distributed with the help of the teaching unions so that we can reach a large number of members. And this will examine vocal problems in general, as well as perceptions of acoustic conditions in the classrooms and problems and strategies for dealing with them. We're currently in the process of undertaking a pilot study to hone the survey questionnaire, and we're hoping to roll that out as a large-scale questionnaire in the next year. The second aim of the project is to actually go into schools and measure the effects of the acoustics in the classrooms on teachers directly. In my professional capacity, when we design classrooms, we're really designing for the pupils to be able to hear and learn effectively, and the voice comfort or the ergonomics of the teachers is really not a consideration in the design at the moment. So really I think that's a missing element of the picture and something that needs more attention. So the aim of my project really is to look at the link between voice levels and the physical acoustics of the room. So to see that, say, in different reverberation time conditions, whether this actually directly affects the speech level of the teachers and the vocal loading that you may assume as a result. Now, in order to do that, I've been very wary that my presence in a classroom with a sound level meter affects the class, and then you're maybe not measuring the true situation. So we're using the vocal accumulator, the APM device, which Maria referred to measure without me needing to be in the classroom. We're doing the pilot study at a particular school in the UK, which is quite unique because they have a selection of identical classrooms which they've treated to different reverberation conditions. So you've got a full range from the traditional classroom, which perhaps has poor acoustics, right the way through to classrooms that are designed for hearing impaired children, which have a very, very high quality acoustic. Other than that, they're essentially identical, so you can see how people behave when everything else is equal, you may say, but the reverberation time is different. So again, that's under the pilot study at the moment, and we're hoping to do further measurements in the next year or so. I'll hand over back to Bridget for the conclusions, if you wish.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, I haven't. I say this. Oh, there's a conclusion. It was really just a summary of everything that we've said. That basically, there is very little research in the UK on this topic. I've a couple of times applied to get research funding to look at teachers' voice problems, and you present all the evidence that it is a problem, but it sort of, particularly if you're trying to compare it with the acoustics, it sort of falls between different disciplines. So you apply to the our Engineering Research Council for funding, and they say, well, this is more a medical thing, or more a social science thing. So you apply to the, well, I haven't actually applied to the medical people because I know it wouldn't be funded by them either. But I don't know, somehow or other, it's very difficult to know where to get the funding. I've also applied to one of our big charitable trusts, actually, which I did last year, I think. And again, it was turned down. So we're very lucky in that Nick is able to do this on a part-time basis, and his employer is sponsoring him to do it. So, so at least the research is being done. And I say, as far as I know, there isn't anything else going on sort of research-wise in the UK at the moment. Yeah, so that's it, really. Okay, thank you.